In Glasgow, Scotland, a professional chef named Michael wakes up with a woman sleeping beside him. It seems like the two recently got intimate and are trying to sleep. Surprisingly, Michael kindly asks the girl to leave, mentioning that he finds it hard to sleep with someone else in his bed. Initially, the girl laughs it off, thinking that Michael must be joking. But when he keeps insisting, she angrily gets out of the bed and leaves. Meanwhile, Susan, an epidemiologist, can be seen taking a walk on the beach with her sister, Jenny. It turns out that she has recently experienced a breakup and is finding it challenging to deal with the situation. To relieve her stress, she starts throwing rocks at seagulls. In the next scene, Michael arrives at the restaurant where he works and has a typical day serving many customers and making varieties of dishes. His colleagues mock him for consistently ending short-lived relationships and breaking up with girls shortly after being romantic with them. On the other hand, Susan returns to work after being absent since her breakup. Unexpectedly, her boss, Stephen, interrupts her on her way to the lab and takes her to the hospital, explaining they need her there. At the hospital, they encounter a man with a puzzling condition, sudden depression, and excessive crying, followed by a loss of smell. Susan wonders why she was called for such a strange case, and Stephen informs her that similar cases have been reported worldwide in the past 24 hours with no apparent connections between the patients. They decide not to panic for now, hoping the situation will resolve on its own. The next day, Susan is smoking by the window before work when she spots Michael coming out of the restaurant's back door on her street. Upon noticing each other, Michael playfully requests a cigarette from Susan. She tosses one to him, and Michael playfully asks her to visit the restaurant, as he is a chef there. However, to his dismay, Susan ignores him and closes her window. Later at the lab, Susan and her coworker update Stephen with their findings. They've ruled out a virus and contention, but they acknowledge that the problem is spreading. They also talk about the potential reasons, which could include a new toxin, environmental factors, or even acts of terrorism. They agree that it's definitely spreading as more and more people in the city experience sudden bouts of grief during the day, followed by a loss of smell. Meanwhile, the authorities address the issue on the news, assuring people that scientists are investigating the situation, and there's no need to panic. However, despite their stressing that it's not contagious, fear grips the streets. One evening, Michael's restaurant is empty, so the staff leaves early. Later, when Michael also goes outside to smoke, he sees Susan arriving after work. He chats with her for a while before inviting her for dinner at the restaurant, where there's extra food due to the lack of customers. Initially, Susan hesitates, which makes sense given she's in charge of the outbreak. But she eventually joins after some insisting because she's a moron. Inside, Michael presents her with his special dish, and Susan appears to be greatly impressed by his cooking skills. However, while enjoying the meal, she is suddenly overwhelmed with grief and starts crying. She mentions that she remembered her late father and cannot stop thinking about him. Michael consoles her and insists on taking her home. Despite her worries about catching the mysterious illness, he stays to comfort her until she falls asleep, but ends up experiencing the same grief himself. Now both of them console each other and eventually fall asleep. The following morning, Michael wakes up to greet Susan in the kitchen and gets to know that she has lost her sense of smell. Right then, he also takes a sip of tea and realizes that he can't smell either. Or maybe that tea is just a silly British poo water and is weak. As they adjust to their new reality, Susan finds her work with animals easier without the smells. But at Michael's restaurant, they face challenges due to the loss of aroma in cooking. His coworkers then decide to intensify the flavors in food with more spices and condiments to compensate. However, they all lament the loss of memories triggered by scents. After some time, Michael arrives at Susan's apartment and asks her out on a date. At first, she shows no interest in his proposal, but eventually agrees to go on a walk with him. During the stroll, they encounter a violinist who uses music and leaves to evoke the feelings of smells and the memories they bring. This gives our protagonist a strange type of attraction toward one another. So without wasting any time, they return to the apartment, get Randy, and spend time together. Surprisingly, Michael, who does not like anyone sleeping on his bed, falls asleep peacefully. But after a while, Susan tells him that she needs to be all by herself and requests Michael leave. Without questioning her choice, he leaves his visiting card and then walks out of her apartment. On his way home, Michael encounters a man who sees the loss of smell as a divine punishment and believes the end is near. Back in his bed, Michael struggles to sleep even though he's alone, feeling the lingering impact of the day's events. The following day, he visits his fiancée's grave at the cemetery and encounters her parents, who criticize him for not bringing flowers for their daughter. Meanwhile, Susan spends time with her sister, Jenny, and her kids. She learns that her ex is getting married and having a baby soon. Susan also talks about Michael, unsure if she truly likes him, because she tends to choose the wrong partners. Hearing this, Jenny suggests she give Michael a chance and accept him. However, Susan replies that she does not want to fall in love again and bear the pain of the breakup. As the days pass, various theories about the mysterious illness emerge worldwide. Environmental groups suspect an ecological apocalypse. Intelligence agencies think it's an attack on freedom. Fundamentalists view it as divine punishment, and some blame capitalism, considering it an economic scheme. There are even mentions of alien involvement, resulting in people losing their senses and eventually their minds. One afternoon, Susan witnesses her boss, Stephen, having a severe panic and anxiety attack at the lab. She confronts him at the moment, but later experiences the same panic attack in the parking lot, along with her coworker and others worldwide. These attacks are followed by intense hunger, leading people to eat strange things like flowers, raw meat, lipstick, and even clothing. Some people are even eating Tide Pods. However, when the frenzy subsides, people feel disgusted by themselves and realize that they can no longer taste anything. In the midst of coping with these changes, Susan seeks comfort in Michael. She explained that taste and smell are connected, and it's natural for them to disappear together, though she's not sure if their other senses will be unaffected. The next morning, Susan looks out the window and sees that people are back on the streets and their lives are still going on despite the changes. With this motivation, she encourages both herself and Michael to continue with their routines, even though he's unsure if he'll keep his job. Later, they agree to start dating, and as they believe that soon people will lose other senses and will need someone by their side to stay happy. In the next scene, when Michael reaches the restaurant, his boss informs him that they won't be opening due to the lack of clients. Turns out people only buy flour and fat these days because they can't taste or smell their food. However, Michael disagrees with his boss and believes that people will still enjoy going out for dinner and celebrating with big toasts. He decides to reinvent the restaurant's menu, focusing on textures and sounds. And luckily, it becomes a great success. People return back to restaurants because they enjoy the social experience of being served and cherish food together with their dear ones. As the world adapts, other sensations replace taste, and there are more bands playing music on the streets. Some people resort to inhaling laughing gas for unconventional enjoyment. Meanwhile, Michael and Susan spend most of their time together finding joy in everyday activities like bathing and shaving. They even playfully taste soap and shaving cream just for the sake of it. During an evening of dancing, drinking, and smoking, Susan proposes a game called Make Me Special. She explains that the rules are simple. They have to share secrets no one else knows about them. She goes first and reveals that she strangely hates her sister's children because she herself is infertile. When it's Michael's turn, he confesses that he ran away from his sick fiancée in the past and wasn't even there for her at the time of her death. Because of this, he visits her grave regularly to cope with the guilt. Days later, the lab receives a video call from Thailand where a scientist reveals a new symptom: fits of rage followed by loss of hearing. He himself demonstrates it on the call, and seeing this, Stephen decides that it's time to panic. Soon people around the world start getting violent, and after their rage subsides, they realize that they have lost their sense of hearing. But despite all of this, people still find a way to continue with their normal lives. One day, Susan goes to work and hears important news. A baby was born with all senses intact, offering a potential source of antibodies. Meanwhile, Michael learns that the restaurant is being shut down due to an infected person on the third floor. The council offers them a job to cook for the team, serving pasta al dente made from fat and flour. As the entire street gets sealed off, Michael waits for Susan and invites her to stay with him since she can't access her place. Susan agrees, but before heading to Michael's house, she pauses to soak in the sounds of the world one last time. Once at Michael's place, Susan playfully mentions living together. But all of a sudden he changes his demeanor and reacts negatively. He becomes verbally abusive, insulting her, and mentioning her infertility. He then starts throwing things around the house and keeps belittling Susan. The situation escalates into violence, and a frightened Susan finally decides to leave. As she drives through chaotic streets, she notices people shouting for help. However, she remains inside her car and drives away to her lab. Soon after Susan leaves, Michael's rage outbreak subsides, and he realizes that he has lost his hearing. To make matters worse, his house is quarantined, and he receives orders to stay inside with government-provided noodles. Later, Susan arrives at the lab to find Stephen alone and help him place. Right then, Michael calls her apologizing for his behavior and expressing his love for her, but Susan refuses to answer him back and throws away her phone. Some epidemiologist. Unfortunately, she also succumbs to rage and becomes deaf. Following this, she heads to her sister's apartment as it is the only safe place in the city for her. Meanwhile, Michael leaves his quarantine house and visits Susan's apartment. Arriving below her window, however, she is not there. Instead, he finds his boss at the restaurant, who has also lost his hearing. Across the globe, two movements emerge. One group who believes in the impending end of the world starts running through the streets and looting everything on sight. However, the other one is focused on rebuilding and using sign language as their primary means of communication. They believe that the world will one day return back to normalcy. Some of them even blindfold their eyes and prepare for their next loss of sense, vision. Next, Michael's restaurant reopens. Serving dish is designed for texture and using lights to signal new orders. He visits a bar they used to frequent and is surprised to find people still enjoying live bands by placing their hands on the speakers to feel the vibrations. As the world awaits the darkness, people focus on visual experiences like reading, getting tattoos, and appreciating paintings and sunsets. Most spend their time with their families, but Michael drowns his sorrows in alcohol, calling out Susan's name under her window. In the last scene, as darkness approaches, an emotional symptom emerges: joyful euphoria. People start feeling extreme happiness and have no regrets, jealousy, or guilt. They hug each other, cherishing life's beauty. At the same time, Michael and Susan both remember the happiness they shared and seek each other out. Susan arrives at the restaurant, and Michael rides his bicycle to find her, but is unable to stop her as she drives away. However, Susan has to return to a one-way road, and they finally meet in the middle of the street. Both are happy to see each other after a long time, and as they walk toward each other, darkness engulfs them. This is when we get to know that people around the globe have turned permanently blind. However, the movie ends with Michael and Susan holding hands, sharing a tearful kiss, and embracing their final moments together, looking like any other couple in deep love. Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. I always love hearing from my viewers, so feel free to leave a comment below with your thoughts on the video or any suggestions for future content. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.